Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. It is June, Pride Month, and like every other year, I like to end the week with a track from an LGBTQ plus artist. And I asked y'all for some recommendations. I've been randomly selecting them. Today, we're going to be checking out the artist Stomach Book. Never heard of this artist before. We're going to be looking at the track BAMBI. I don't know what to expect. That is very MySpace era animation and art direction. There's definitely a part of it that feels nostalgic to me. Let's dive in though. See what Stomach Book is bringing to the table today.
Truthfully, I dare you to die. Bambi.
I'm in a nightmare, please don't wake me up. A blurry face through a train window is crying. Secret after secret, I'm calling your bluff. The worry fades into stillborn daydream. Life spent behind eyes, it's never enough. So play a song on my little music box. Teeth whine in my guts, there's power in the blood. Oh my dear, won't you look at what you've done to me? To me. To me. To me.
I like the way the melody bounces around between the channels.
I am a house that's haunted by your love. So make me hurt, maybe then I'll say I'm
The split
sorry.
vocals,
Cold, shallow
bringing it
skin,
back.
just begging for your touch. A dissonant chord is buzzing in my eye.
There's something very emo coded about the vocal delivery.
Turn the lights off, let me write my memory on your eyelids. Make my heart stop, let me write my melody on your irises. I'll never
Super compressed like hi-hat work over here. Some harsh vocals too.
Jumping, now we don't moshi on my back of Karen, passing Karen through the night with no sleep. I never questioned it when you needed to leave my neck, but now the payment's overdue. I'm turning to the Reaper man. I need my fucking blood back. My sweat, my tears, it's all that in the first place. That time is here. Slow down, slow down, slow down, slow down. All I'm hearing in your head. Why you so afraid of dying? I'm like, you're already dead. See it chasing all these terrors, but you feel most is my heart. You're a deer stuck in the road and you're charging into a car. Then you help you crave disease, with your glory claim defeat. Go if somebody's gonna kill you, then it might as well be me. It's not enough to spit on you, got nothing but my fists to use. Gave way more than my ribs to you, you're Lilith to a fault. I've set up all these fucking rules, they don't mean anything to you. And if I didn't love you so much, it'd end in assault.
Turn the lights off, let me write my melody
Such a big change
on your eyelids. Make my
to these almost hyper-pop vocals.
melody on your irises. I'm married way too wrong. I don't get it. I'm married way too wrong.
Ooh, that double time on the drums.
Turn the lights off, let me write my memory on your eyelids. Make my heart stop. Turn the lights off, let me write my
So a little variation on our final chorus, presumably.
stop. Let me write my melody on your irises. I'm married way too wrong. I don't get it. I'm married way too wrong.
Interesting note choices on this melody over here. Very interesting track. It's almost like emo, screamo at parts, even by way of hyper pop. I can't say I've heard anything like this, but I kind of enjoy it. There's some parts in it that I don't think are necessarily for me, but I could probably come around to it with a little bit of exposure and familiarity. One of the first things that really jumps out at me that I think is subjectively not something I would traditionally enjoy is this melody over here. It has a very circusy vibe to it, both in timbre and note choices. It's moving around a lot in thirds and focusing, to me, it sounds in descending patterns, but it isn't just a straight drop in pitch. But what stands out to me most about it is just how out of tune it is with everything else. Interestingly, it's not at a place where it creates a lot of harmonic friction and in that it's creating a ton of dissonance, but it certainly stands out in the harmonic qualities of this track. These notes don't fit. They're not clashing, but they don't fit either. And I think that's really interesting. But because they're sort of down tuned through most of this, and I'm kind of curious if that is a tuning thing, like a traditional tuning element, or maybe it's something more modern, like formant shifting, which is also going to alter the timbre of it, because it does kind of feel like maybe a toy piano, but it's way bassier than a toy piano normally would be. And so, again, I'm kind of leaning towards formant shifting, which would be pretty cool there. I'm curious about the process into how Stomach Book. Well, I wonder, is Stomach Book the producer also, or just the vocalist? Maybe it's the artist name. I'll look some of this up when I hit the lyrics. Regardless, I'm kind of interested in how this sound itself was produced. Now, moving into a very different idea, something I really loved was the bass work on this track. It is incredibly consistent. Most of the instruments on here have just one or two ideas and sort of flip back and forth between them. There's not a lot of variety on this track as far as what each individual instrument is performing, but the bass parts, it's pretty cool, dude. There's a lot of movement to it. It does focus on root tones, but not exclusively. And you could actually hear this approach very clearly at the end of the track, though it was consistently present throughout the track too, in which we would have a bunch of movement, drop down to a root tone, play it a couple of times, then have some cool movement and drop down to the new root tone as the chord progresses. How much time we spend on the root note of the chord is different for each chord. Sometimes we sit on it a little longer if for whatever reason the bass lick needs to spend more time there. But there's so many moving lines on this, and the bassist, well, I'm pretty sure it's a digital instrument, but if it were played, the bassist would not be spending a lot of time just sitting around on one note. And I really appreciate that about it. It does fill a more foundational role within the track in that it is very focused on hitting these key notes, the root tones for each of the chords, and holding down this harmonic information, but it isn't locked into that role exclusively. It also participates and contributes to the melodic qualities in this track. And I'm a big fan of bass that do things. So I love what I heard with the bass on this track, and I actually found it to be pretty interesting because it is emo coded. I still find a lot of this to be influenced by emo and screamo music, particularly with the vocals, but also at times with some of the harmonic writing in it, the chords used throughout it. This is not what I would call a pop track if we look at the chordal movements and the note choices within the vocals and how those notes intervals play against the melody itself. All of this is very much influenced by emo music. Emo is not a genre, I think, that is heavily bass focused. I can certainly point to some emo bands who have strong bass writing in it, but I don't think I'd call it the norm, though there's also a lot of emo music I'm not aware of, so I might just be focusing on some of the stuff that has less interesting bass work. But even when I look at the other influence of this, which is electronic music, it's where a lot of the timbres come from. Bass is kind of hit or miss there too. A lot of the time, the bass sound, the bass synth, or whatever tone they're using for a bassy sound is just going to be pedal tone. So I find it really interesting that the bass work is as moving and melodic as it is here, because the two main influences I hear on this don't always have strong bass representation in their composition. I'm really happy to hear moving bass lines, dude, and I'll talk about it all day. This is probably going to be the biggest portion of this analysis, and it's just praise. I don't even have like an analysis of why the bass is moving, what it's contributing emotionally or thematically. I'm just like, I love the way this sounds, and I'm going to talk about it for a little bit. Now, the other side of this, though, too, is the vocals. I have a big affinity for this vocal style. Some of it is the placement. It is very forward-placed vocal style. It isn't resonating back at the, at the back of the mouth. It is projected, forward-placed. It's a very bright sound in general. But it's also the note choices, what notes have, what part of the sentence of the melody gets to be held out, which ones are more quickly moved. Everything from the cadence to the note choices feels emo to me. I'm very right at home in the melodic writing here. But we also have at the end of the first verse, I think it was, kind of holding a note out and then slowly incorporating the fry crackle sound underneath it until it just became and then converting that more into a fry scream, bringing the harsh vocal in. That is a classic screamo technique right there. And then of course the harsh vocals themselves are very screamo coded, particularly even bringing in some of that atonal pitched singing underneath and around the screams to sort of bounce back and forth between something cleaner and something harsher, while still incorporating a harshness to it, not focusing on perfectly into notes on the cleans, but focusing on dissonance. I've heard that so many times in my life, and there's just something really reassuring about that sound. It's probably just nostalgia, but I like it. And that's present here too. So great technique across the board, lots of vocal variety here, and a playfulness to the variety or to the vocals as well, not just having two styles, but finding ways to incorporate them together, to smoothly move between them, to just incorporate them in uniquely characterized ways within this track. Is there anything else in here I wanted to bring up? Oh, we do have the more spoken word rapped section in here. I am seeing that there is a featured artist on this called zombAe, which cracks me up a little bit. That's a clever little pun there. That part was interesting because it contrasted so well against the opening verse, but I think even more so against the chorus. We did spend a lot of time in that rapped verse though, and I feel like it dominated most of the track, and being that it was generally lower energy across the board and a bit more static, particularly because of the more monotonous vocal delivery, I don't think it really stood out to me as much. But it did make the punch coming back to the chorus worthwhile. So I did enjoy that. And then we have the bridge to this track, or a breakdown. We have the double time on the drums, and then just the screaming, constant screaming going on. That wasn't my favorite part of the track, but it did end up being really catchy. By the time that we converted it into the outro of the song, and I kind of felt the cadence and rhythm of it. And it ended up being a bit funner the second time around than the first time, where I was just kind of focusing on the quasi-monotonous quality of just focusing on screams for an extended period of time. Yeah, I think that's about it. We covered the bass, instrumental melodies, vocal melodies, the drums. The drums are pretty consistent throughout. Rising and falling action, yeah. Let me hit some lyrics on this, and we'll see what's going on there. There's a lot of lyrics here, and I'd love to hear someone else's interpretation of this, simply because I don't know how to read this. The words make sense. There's a lot of good metaphor in here, great figurative writing, and I understand most of it. But what I don't understand is the shift moving from Stomach Book singing the song to zombAe, which has a drastic change in vocabulary, presence, and even linguistic demeanor in a way that, to me, is a completely different perspective on a similar topic. And I wonder if they aren't designed to be supportive perspectives or antagonistic perspectives. And I think that the lines can be read both ways. And maybe that is also kind of the point of it, to create a sort of synergistic duality. I'm not sure, though. We do have, though, from the start, Stomach Book is singing in the first verse about feeling like they're not living life the way they would want to. At one point it says that my life has been spent behind my own eyes. It's never enough. Not necessarily in control of their body or seeing the things of their own will, but simply being a passenger within their body, seeing from behind their eyes. And not even just seeing, but living a life from behind their eyes. I think that's a really interesting line, sort of feeling captive within one's own body. It talks about, though, the very first line says, I'm in a nightmare. Please don't wake me up. That's interesting too, that leaving the nightmare is something they don't want, either because being awoken will put them in a worse scenario, that this nightmare is the better of two bad situations, or that the nightmare is where they feel most comfortable. To leave that would be to be in a place of uncertainty, which is scary in its own right. I'm not sure. It does say wine in my guts, there's power in my blood, almost as if they are trying to find the courage to do something, and they're finding that courage through alcohol, or maybe through any abuse. It could be a figurative alcohol, wine, where it's not necessarily the wine itself, but any other addiction to help them find strength. And through that lens, it might even be a false strength too. But then it also says, oh my dear, won't you look at what you've done to me? I'm a house that's haunted by your love. So make me hurt, and maybe then I'll say I'm sorry. So we have someone who is in a submissive position against another force. They're a house that's haunted by someone else's love. Love is usually a positive thing. Haunted is usually a negative thing. We have this clashing here. Then it says, make me hurt. Maybe I'll say, I'm sorry. This sounds pretty typical for an abusive relationship, where the abuser psychologically or maybe physically harms the other person, and they'll end up apologizing for it. Usually with the abuser saying something like, look what you've made me do, and the person being abused apologizing for that. It has this really interesting line here too, that the other person is a dissonant chord buzzing in my eyes. As much as I dislike dissonant tones, I absolutely feel this as a negative line, but maybe it's not necessarily supposed to. A lot of people who are fans of noise rock or noise music in general find dissonant tones to be soothing, so that might be interpreted in a different way if that's the case. The chorus is interesting. It says, turn the lights off and let me write my memory on your eyelids. Make my heart stop and let me write my melody on your irises. So turning the lights off is a reduction of information, light, enlightenment, learning things, but it's also about being hidden, being disguised in the darkness, being something that can't be seen. But they still want to write their melody on your eyelids. Sorry, write their memory Memory would be experiences. Let me show you my experiences in a way you can't avoid them. They're on your eyelids. Even if you close your eyes, you still have to see them. There's something personal there. Maybe this is the strength they were trying to find through the wine to express themselves to their abuser. That kind of lines up with the let me write my melody on your irises. Let me show you who I am in a way you can't ignore it. But then it says it's a merry way to rot. Being in this relationship is rotting, but it's not bad. It's not as bad as it could be. There is maybe happiness coming from love bombing, possibly. What's interesting is that the narrator seems to understand that this is not a great way to live, but it does seem to be a better of two evils. And that's fairly consistent throughout the opening verses and the chorus. But then we have the screamed parts of the chorus, look at me when I'm talking to you, which is usually a dominating perspective to be in. It requires or requests, even demands in this case, that you look at the person who's talking to you, that you give them your attention. Now, it might just be my own experience with that phrase, but it is very, very rarely ever used in a positive way or a caring way. It's a demanding way. It is to demand someone's attention. I think the fact that it is screamed, I would apply this to the perspective of the abuser if this song is about an abusive relationship. Now, I do want to, before we dive into anything else, say that this might not necessarily be a physical, literal, abusive relationship between two physical, literal people. It could be a battle within oneself. I'm not 100% sure about that, but there's enough metaphor in here about interior elements. I mean, here's the whole thing, right? The first verse is about feeling distant from things, about feeling like a passenger within one's own body. Says that there's a blurry face through a train window that's crying. A blurry face, not being able to see who it is. What if that is the reflection of our narrator here? So it could be that they're feeling trapped within their own body and that there is a force within that is suppressing them. This is the toxic relationship here. It's a relationship of the self with the self. With that said, we come to zombAe's verse, and like I said, things are very different here. It starts off, says, me, a dope fiend. Now we don't mosh mosh. This is interesting. Mosh mosh is the way, I believe, in Japanese that you would greet someone, particularly only over the phone, though. Let me know if I'm missing some nuance to that. Regardless, what we're talking about here is that we don't greet each other. We don't say hi. We don't even talk to each other anymore. Says, on my back, a carapace I carried through the night with no sleep. I never questioned it when you needed to leech my neck, but now that payment's overdue and I'm turning to the repo man. Like, you're like a parasite to me. And I've been fine with that, but you've taken so much of my blood and I need it back now. In fact, the bridge even goes into this, says, I need my blood back, my sweat, my tears. It's all mine in the first place and tax time is here. So there's a confidence in this verse that's totally different from the more passive side that we saw in the opening verse. And that's why I'm kind of wondering what this perspective is. They talked about consuming wine to gain courage. Is this how they are when they have some courage? Or is this a totally different perspective entirely? It feels like it could be antagonistic. This could be the abuser speaking from this perspective, calling the person he's abusing a leech in order to put them down and make them feel even smaller. but it could be the person who is abused finally fighting back. I think the lyrics work for both perspectives, and I'm not really sure how to interpret that. But the rest of this section is all about how this person wants control and they have the power to do it. Verse 4 says, I give you health and you crave disease. I lift you to glory and you claim defeat. If someone's going to kill you, it might as well be me. The bridge goes back into the parasitic language again. It says, I gave you way more than my ribs. You're a Lilith to a fault. I've set up all these rules and it don't mean anything to you. If I didn't love you so much, it would end in assault, which does feel like abusive speech right there. And it's the only one here that I think really lines up with that perspective. That might be the key necessary to say, yes, this whole thing is, this whole verse is supposed to be from the abuser's perspective, but it is just that one line. So I don't know if I can put all of the weight on it to carry an entire reading of it. From here, though, the rest of the track is the chorus, the look at me when I'm talking to you yelled over and over and over, and then back to the chorus, again, back to that look at me when I'm talking to you. So I do believe this song is about a toxic relationship of sorts. Could be external, could be internal, could be between two people, could be just one person and themselves. But it is about someone who's a bit weaker and, well, meeker. I didn't necessarily want to rhyme, but here we go. Wanting more out of their life, but feeling comfortable in the situation they are. There's a fear of getting out of this relationship, of actually being more true to themselves and maybe even having more of an impact in their life, feeling more in control over who they are. But it is scary to do that, and the comfort is something that makes this feel more comfortable, to be haunted by this love, rather than finding a love that isn't haunting. I don't really find too much of this within the music itself. These themes don't seem too prominent, other than the sort of carnival-esque sound that is formant shifted and out of tune. There's certainly an element of being out of place, out of synergy with the rest of it that I can kind of attribute if this is an internal conflict. I can find that, but most of this track doesn't really seem to bear too much of the lyrical themes within what it's exploring. All right. These are my thoughts on Stomach Book's Bambi featuring zombAe. Let me know what you thought of this. Is there anything that stood out to you? Anything that you would like to add on to what I said or correct me on? Do you have your own take, perspective, or opinion on this track? Let me know. Put all of that and anything else you'd like to add into the comments section below. Above that, in the description box, you can find a link to Linktree. It takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. I'll be back tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC as usual. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.